Chapter 2, A Beautiful Day. It was one of those perfect autumn days so common in stories and so rare in the real world. The weather was warm and dry, ideal for ripening a field of wheat or corn. And on both sides of the road, the trees were changing color. Tall poplars had gone a buttery yellow, while the shrubby sumac encroaching on the road was tinged with a violent red. Only the old oaks seemed reluctant to give up the summer, and their leaves remained an even mingling of gold and green. Everything said, you couldn't hope for a nicer day to have a half-dozen ex-soldiers with hunting bows relieve you of everything that you owned. "She's not much of a horse, sir," chronicler said. "One small step above a dray, and when it rains, she—" The man cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Listen, friend, the king's army is paying good money for anything with 4 legs and at least 1 eye, and if you were stark mad and riding a hobby horse down the road, I'd still take it off of you." Their leader had an air of command about him. Chronicler guessed that he had been a low-ranking officer not long ago. "Just hop down," he said, seriously. "We'll get this done with, and you can be on your way." Chronicler climbed down from his horse. He had been robbed before, and he knew when there was nothing to be gained by discussion. These fellows knew their business. No energy was wasted on bravado or idle threats. One of them looked over at the horse, checking the hooves, the teeth, and the harness. 2 others went through his saddlebags with a military efficiency, laying all his worldly possessions on the ground. 2 blankets, a hooded cloak, flat leather satchel, and his heavy, well-stocked travel sack. "That's all of it, Commander," one of them said, "except for about 20 pounds of oats." The commander knelt down and opened the flat leather satchel, peering inside. "There's nothing but paper and pens in here," chronicler said. The commander turned to look backward over his shoulder. "You a scribe, then?" Chronicler nodded. "It's my livelihood, sir, and no real use to you." The man looked through the satchel, found it to be true, and set it aside. And then he upended the travel sack onto Chronicler's spread cloak and poked idly through the contents. He took most of Chronicler's salt and a pair of bootlaces, and then, much to the scribe's dismay, he picked up the shirt Chronicler had bought back in Linwood. It was fine linen dyed a deep royal blue, too nice for traveling. Chronicler hadn't even had a chance to wear it, he sighed. The commander left everything else lying on the cloak, got to his feet. The others took turns going through Chronicler's things. The commander spoke up. "You only have 1 blanket, don't you?" One of the men nodded. "Take one of his, then. You'll need a second before winter's through." "His cloak is in better shape than mine, sir." "Take it, but leave yours. The same for you, Whitkins. Leave your old tinderbox if you're taking his." "I lost mine, sir," Whitkins said, "else I would." The whole process was surprisingly civilized. Chronicler lost all of his needles but 1. Both extra pairs of socks, a bundle of dried fruit, a small loaf of sugar, half a bottle of alcohol, a pair of ivory dice. They left him the rest of his clothes, his dried meat, and half-eaten loaf of incredibly stale rye bread. His flat leather satchel remained untouched. And while the men repacked his travel sack, the commander turned to Chronicler. "Let's have the purse, then." Chronicler handed it over, and the ring. "There's hardly any silver in it," Chronicler mumbled as he unscrewed it from his finger. "What's that around your neck?" Chronicler unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a dull ring of metal hanging from a leather cord. "Just iron, sir." The commander came close and rubbed it between his fingers before letting it fall back against Chronicler's chest. "Keep it, then. I'm not one to come between a man and his religion," he said, and then he emptied the purse into one hand, making a pleasantly surprised noise as he prodded through the coins with his finger. "Scribing pays better than I thought," he said, as he began to count out shares to his men. I don't suppose you could spare me a penny or two out of that, Chronicler said. Just enough for a couple of hot meals? The 6 men turned to look at Chronicler as if they couldn't quite believe what he had said. The commander laughed. God's body, you certainly have a heavy pair, don't you? There was a grudging respect in his voice. You seem like a reasonable fellow, Chronicler said with a shrug. And a man's gotta eat. Their leader smiled for the first time, a sentiment I can agree with. He took out 2 pennies and brandished them before putting them back into Chronicler's purse. Here's a pair. For you, then. He tossed Chronicler the purse and stuffed a beautiful royal blue shirt into his saddlebag. Thank you, sir, Chronicler said. You might want to know that bottle one of your men took is wood alcohol I use for cleaning my pens. It'll go badly if he drinks it. The commander smiled and nodded. You see what comes of treating people well? He said to his men as he pulled himself up onto his horse. It's been a pleasure, Sir Scribe. If you get on your way now, you can still make Abbott's Ford by dark. When Chronicler could no longer hear the hoofbeats in the distance, he repacked his travel sack, making sure everything was well stowed. He tugged off one of his boots, stripped out the lining, and removed a tightly wrapped bundle of coins stuffed deep into the toe. He moved some of these into his purse, and then unfastened his pants, produced another bundle of coins from underneath several layers of clothes, and moved some of that money into his purse as well. The key was to keep the proper amount in your purse. Too little, and they would think that they would be feeling disappointed and prone to look for more. Too much, and they would be excited and might get greedy. There was a third bundle of coins baked into the stale loaf of bread that only the most desperate of criminals would be interested in, and he left that alone for now, as well as a whole silver talent that he had hidden in a jar of ink. Over the years, he had come to think of the last as more of a luck piece. No one had ever found that. He had to admit, it was probably the most civil robbery that he had ever been through. They had been genteel, efficient, and not terribly savvy. Losing the horse and the saddle was hard, but he could buy another at Abbott's Ford and still have enough money to live comfortably until he finished this foolishness and met up with Scarpy and Treya. Feeling an urgent call of nature, Chronicler pushed his way through the bloodied sumac at the side of the road, and as he was rebuttoning his pants, there was a sudden motion in the underbrush as a dark shape thrashed its way free from some nearby bushes. Chronicler staggered back, crying out in alarm before he realized it was nothing more than a crow beating its wings into flight. Chuckling at his own foolishness, he straightened his clothes and made his way back to the road, through the sumac, brushing away invisible strands of spiderweb that clung, tickling to his face. And as he shouldered his travel sack and satchel, Chronicler found himself feeling remarkably lighthearted. The worst had happened, and it hadn't been that bad, and a breeze tussled through the trees, sending poplar leaves spinning like golden coins down onto the rutted dirt road. And it was beautiful. Chapter 3. Wood and Word. Cote was leafing idly through a book, trying to ignore the silence of the empty inn, and when the door opened and Graham backed into the room, he said, "Just got done with it." Graham maneuvered through the maze of tables with exaggerated care. "I was gonna bring it in last night, but then I thought, one last coat of oil, rub it and let it dry. Can't say I'm sorry that I did. Lord and lady, it's beautiful as anything these hands have ever made." A small line formed between the innkeeper's eyebrows. Then, seeing the flat bundle in the man's arms, he brightened. "Ah, the mounting board!" Cote smiled tiredly. "I'm sorry, Graham. It's been so long. I'd almost forgotten." Graham gave him a bit of a strange look. 4 months ain't long for wood all the way through Aryan. Not with the roads being as bad as they are. 4 months, Cote echoed. He saw Graham watching him and hurried to add, that can be a lifetime if you're waiting for something. He tried to smile reassuringly, but it came out sickly. In fact, the innkeeper himself seemed rather sickly. Not exactly unhealthy, but hollow. Wan. Like a plant that's been moved into the wrong sort of soil and lacking something vital. He began to wilt. Graham noted the difference. The innkeeper's gestures weren't as extravagant, his voice wasn't as deep, even his eyes weren't as bright as they had been a month ago. Their colors seemed duller. They were less seafoam, less green grass than they had been. And now they were like riverweed, like the bottom of a green glass bottle. And his hair had been bright before, the color of a flame, but now it seemed just red hair color, really. Cote drew back the cloth and looked underneath. The wood was a dark charcoal color with a black grain, heavy as a sheet of iron. 3 dark pegs were set above a word chiseled into the wood. Folly, Graham read. Odd name for a sword. Cote nodded, his face carefully blank. How much do I owe you? He asked quietly. Graham thought for a moment. After what you'd given me to cover the cost of the wood? There was a cunning glimmer in the man's eye. Around 1 in 3. Cote handed over 2 talents. Keep the rest. It's difficult wood to work with. That it is, Graham said with some satisfaction. Like stone under the saw. Try a chisel, like iron. Then, after all that shouting was done, I couldn't char it. I noticed that, Cote said with a flicker of curiosity, running a finger along the darker groove the letters made in the wood. How did you manage it? Well, Graham said smugly, after wasting half a day, I took it over to the smithy, and me and the boy managed to sear it with some hot iron. Took us better than 2 hours to get it black. Not a wisp of smoke, but it made a stink like old leather and clover. Damnedest thing. What sort of wood don't burn? Graham wanted a minute, but the innkeeper gave no signs of having heard. Where would you like me to hang it, then? Cote roused himself enough to look around the room. You can leave that to me, I think. I haven't quite decided where to put it. Graham left a handful of iron nails and bid the innkeeper a good day. Cote remained at the bar, idly running his hands over the wood and the word. Before too long, Bast came out of the kitchen and looked over his teacher's shoulder. There was a long moment of silence, like a tribute, even most given to the dead. Eventually, Bast spoke up. May I ask a question, Reishi? Cote smiled gently. Always, Bast. A troublesome question? Those tend to be the only worthwhile kind. They remained staring at the object on the bar for another silent moment, as if trying to commit to memory. Folly. Bast struggled for a moment, opening his mouth and then closing it with a frustrated look, and then repeating the process. Out with it, Cote said finally. What were you thinking? Bast said, with an odd mixture of confusion and concern. Cote was a long while in answering. I tend to think too much, Bast. My greatest successes came from decisions that I made when I stopped thinking and simply did what felt right. Even if there was no good explanation for what I did, he smiled wistfully. Even if there were very good reasons for me not to do what I did. Bast ran a hand along the side of his face. So you're trying to avoid second-guessing yourself? Cote hesitated. You could say that, he admitted. I could say that, Reishi, Bast said smugly. You, on the other hand, would complicate things needlessly. Cote shrugged and turned his eyes back to the mounting board. Nothing to do but find a place for it, I suppose. Out here? Bast's expression was horrified. Cote grinned wickedly, a measure of vitality coming back into his face. "Of course," he said, seeming to savor Bast's reaction. He looked speculatively at the walls and pursed his lips. "Where did you put it anyway?" "In my room," Bast admitted, "under my bed." Cote nodded distractedly, still looking at the walls. "Go get it then." He made a small, shooing gesture with one hand, and Bast hurried off, looking unhappy. The bar was decorated with glimmering bottles, and Cote was standing on the now vacant counter between the two heavy oak barrels when Bast came back into the room, black scabbard swinging loosely from one hand. Cote paused in the act of setting the mounting board atop one of the barrels and cried out in dismay, "Careful, Bast! You're carrying a lady there, not swinging some wench at the barn dance." Bast stopped in his tracks and dutifully carried it up with both hands before walking the rest of the way to the bar. Cote pounded a pair of nails into the wall, twisted some wire, and hung the mounting board firmly on the wall. "Hand it up, would you?" he asked with an odd catch in his voice. Using both hands, Bast held it up to him, looking for a moment like a squire offering up a sword to some bright armored knight. But there was no knight there, just an innkeeper, just a man in an apron who called himself Cote, and he took the sword from Bast and stood upright on the counter behind the bar. He drew the sword without a flourish. It shone a dull gray-white in the room's autumn light, and had an appearance of a new sword, but it was not notched or rusted. There were no bright scratches skittering along the dull gray side, but though it was unmarred, it was old. And while it was obviously a sword, it was not a familiar shape. At least no one in this town would have found it familiar, and it looked as if an alchemist had distilled a dozen swords, and when the crucible had cooled this with lying in the bottom, a sword in its pure form. It was slender and graceful. It was deadly and sharp stone beneath swift water. Cote held it a moment. His hand did not shake. And then he set the sword on the mounting board. Its gray-white metal shone against the dark roa behind it. And while the handle could be seen, it was dark enough to be almost indistinguishable from the wood. The word beneath it, black against the blackness, seemed to reproach. Folly.